And joining us today, very pleased to have him with us here on the show. He is the Business Growth Director of Agriculture for OBP, formerly at USDA. Richard Fordyce is with us. And Richard, I appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us on Market Talk. How are you, sir?
I am great, Jesse, and thanks for having me on.
Well, let's start before we really dive into our topics today. As I mentioned, you are now with OBP, that's Osborne Barr Paramore, and obviously a lot of folks know you from your time at USDA, et cetera. But talk about your new role a little bit, just for folks who may not know what you've been up to. Let's start there. What are you up to these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So OBP, as you said, is Osborne Barr Paramore. Formerly was Osborne Barr, and so that might be a little bit more familiar with folks. Osborne Barr is a public relations, communications, marketing company that focuses, I would say, almost exclusively on agriculture, but we are branching out a little bit into tourism and some other things. But been around. The agency's been around over 30 years, telling the good story of agriculture, and it was a good fit for me after being in Washington, really communicating about, federal farm programs and federal farm policy to rural Americans, for about 3.5 years. It really seemed like a good fit to come here. And so I do a number of things. I work with the clients that we have around just agricultural issues, farming, so what's going on the farm today? Our clients want to know that, and so that they're doing the things that their customers expect them to do, and they're doing them at the right time. Get to work with a bunch of really good people, really smart people that have a passion for agriculture. It's literally the perfect spot for me after what I had done, previously. So really, really enjoy it.
Well, I know your previous time as FSA Administrator, you dealt with a lot of things going on in DC. We're going to talk about some of that, but I kind of want to start on the farm. Obviously, a lot of our producers here this spring had a tough go of it, depending on what part of the country you were in. Some folks, in the Northern Plains didn't get planted, but I know you're still on the farm as well quite a bit, Richard. So talk about how spring went for you and maybe what you've heard from some of your friends around the country, just how challenging things may or may not have been this spring.
Yeah, Jesse, boy, that this is, we always say, we always look forward to next year, right? And so next year will be, we always say, next year will be better. It may not be better, but it's going to be different. And, this year has really been a challenge, depending on what part of the country you're in. On our farm, so we're 100 miles north of Kansas City and 100 miles south of Des Moines, Iowa. So we're in Northwest Missouri, just almost into Iowa. And, we had some challenges, but we were able to get things planted. And most everything in our area, a little late, but it got planted. I know we talked before we started to air. I'm in St. Louis today, and so I drove from Northwest Missouri to St. Louis yesterday, and I was shocked at the number of planters that were running yesterday. And just a lot of bare fields. There were fields that had cover crop that had been terminated that has not been planted yet. I'm sure those acres are going to go to soybeans. I was glad to see folks planting, right? Actually planting as opposed to prevent plant certainly is a better option. But, it just seems like this thing has drug on. As we know in the soybean world, for example, we're planting soybeans earlier. We intended to plant some soybeans that first week of April. Mm-hmm. So April, May, now we're in the middle of June. Planting season's gone on 2.5 months in my part of the world.
It's amazing. It really is. But, hopefully it's good to see those planters going, because obviously farmers, if they can, we passed a lot of those insurance deadlines, but folks are trying to get a crop in the ground, just considering, some of the historic numbers we're seeing when it comes to prices right now. And obviously there's a lot of factors underneath that, and there's a lot of maybe concern heading to next year. But right now, you're seeing $7, $8 corn. You're seeing 15, 16, $17 soybeans, $10 to $12, $13 wheat. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity. And of course, on this show, we talk a lot about marketing and what you could do. But from your perspective as a farmer and being involved in agriculture, I mean, you know, it pays to get something in the ground. It almost seems like right now, Richard.
It does, and I think that's surely that's some of the motivation. Although, we as farmers, we're incredibly resilient, and we're very glass half full, kind of folks. And so, but the prices, commodity prices certainly are going to be that an additional incentive to get this planting done this year. And you're right, Jesse. I mean, we've got some old crop, a little bit of soybeans left. We have some corn left. Some of it's priced. Frankly, some of it's not. We're kind of, we're gambling, let's say, with a little bit of that old crop corn. But new crop prices. I mean, and I think we'll probably talk about inputs a little bit, maybe a little bit later. I mean, this has been a very expensive crop to plant, but there are some profits to be locked in right now with new crop, some new crop prices. But you mentioned wheat, corn, soybeans. Really across the board, there are some opportunities. We've done some new crop marketing across a couple of different fronts, but not with our expected yield. We're not anywhere close to being marketed. So, but there are some opportunities right now for sure.
Well, and you mentioned inputs, and I think that's some of the worry that some farmers may have, and maybe you do as well, with marketing too much, because you wonder what that yield is going to look like this fall. But on the flip side of that as well, I mean, going into next year, worried about availability, worried about the cost. How much is seed going to be? What's fertilizer going to look like? And you mentioned locking in some of those profits. It's kind of a double-edged sword. You don't want to lock in too much, and we're talking, not just new crop, but even 23 as well, because you don't know what inputs are going to cost. And I know that's a big worry in rural America right now.
It is. I think cost is one thing, but you did mention it, availability, right? So, I think there's an expectation. Well, let me back up. When we started to see, when we first started to hear that there might be some supply issues, certainly costs are going up. We spent some time at OBP literally polling farmers, talking to people. We were at Commodity Classic talking to folks. What do you think about the 2022 growing season? And by and large, most folks were saying, well, I purchased last fall, or, I've already got it booked. It's costing a lot more, but I think I'm going to be fine. 2023 is what I'm worried about. And so you make a great point. We don't know what 2023 is going to look like. We could see opportunities where, some of the inputs, whether that's fertilizer, whether that's chemistry, we could see maybe a movement of when we know we've got literally more than a year, when some of these supply chain issues started to happen, we could see kind of a freeing up of some of that. Or we could see it remain fairly similar to what we saw this year. Or we could see some really supply issues. We know certainly from a global fertilizer perspective, what's going on in the Black Sea region plays a critical role, and from supply chain, actually getting that material shipped out, getting in the case of potash, actually getting it mined. We don't use a ton of potash from that region in the U.S., but it will affect the global market of potash, and so it's going to affect price no matter how this thing all kind of plays out. But I do believe that if you talk to a farmer today, Northern Plains, Eastern Corn Belt, Western Corn Belt, Delta, wherever in the country you might be, those are the issues, at least the folks I'm talking to, and in my own head, those are the things that I'm thinking about. And what are those things going to mean next year? So yeah, I mean, lock in I mean, if you can lock in a profit on some of your production, 2022 production, we've been told all of our lives, it's really hard to go broke when you're making money. So, figure out a way to lock in some profit on some of that production. And then, this might be a bumpy ride. Who knows?
Well, Richard, on the other side of that equation as well, what about some of the companies you're working with at OBP? What are they saying? What are they worried about heading into later this fall and into 2023? Are you hearing some of the same things? Any differences? What are you hearing from the companies themselves that bring us our products?
So yeah, Jesse, great question. And, we had some, whether it's glyphosate, glufosinate, some of the chemistries, there were some ingredients that go into those chemistries that were coming from overseas, literally different places. So some from China, some from other places where the raw material ingredients come from. Some of the companies that we work with, they're obviously working to mitigate that, right? Figuring out, is that going to be an issue for manufacturing and production next year? And trying to mitigate those, those issues. Again, we're a long way away from 23 planting, but I think what we caught a glimpse of from a supply chain accessing inputs in 2022 really put our industry partners on alert, right? Like, this could happen. This might be the situation. Let's do all we can to mitigate it. Let's do all we can to make sure that we're able to supply the U.S. farmer with what they need to put a crop in 2023. Sometimes those things can be mitigated. Obviously, sometimes they can't. If things are out of your control, then that's a little bit of a problem. But I do take relief in that there is some time, right? So there's some time to get those things figured out, and that's kind of what folks are talking about at this point.
Richard, I want to switch gears to what's going on in Washington. Obviously, you spend a lot of time in DC, so you have a good idea of how things work in that town. And obviously, we're hearing a lot of worry about inflation. The Federal Reserve, their interest rate hike here recently, that's a big worry here for folks across the country. Gas prices, diesel prices are going up. The cost of goods at the grocery store, everything is being hit by inflation. And we're seeing the government try to do various things to curb inflation. You look at the House and the Senate. They're working on various bills right now. The Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act here passed just a few days back. I know that's something that a lot of folks in agriculture are talking about. And plus, we got a farm bill we're writing. So, I mean, you look at all the activity right now in DC when it comes to agriculture. What are some things that stand out to you, and what do you make of some of the things that are trying to be done to help out, folks across the country?
Yeah, that's a big topic. As in a typical cycle, we're close. The last farm bill passed in 2018, was signed on December 21st of 2018, but it did pass in 2018. 2023, we should have a new farm bill, right? And so lots of activities. I know, the Senate have had a couple of hearings, or I know one in Michigan, maybe the other one in Arkansas has not happened, or maybe it did.
I think they both have. Yes.
Yeah. Trying to check the temperature, what's going on, what are you thinking about? And so at the same time, when you're trying to think about how do we write a farm bill that has meaningful provisions for agriculture for 5 years, right? So this is a law that's written, and takes a little time to administer. It takes a little time to get it out the door, but it is law of the land for 5 years. So you have those, you have the titles in the farm bill, the conservation title, and I want to talk about that just a little bit. The nutrition title, we've heard for a long time, some folks say we need to split those out. We need to split, conservation, credit, split that out away from nutrition. I would be the first and, joining a chorus of a bunch of folks that say you don't want to do that, right? Mm-hmm. You bring more people to the table to talk about the issues if you have farm type legislation in that bill and you have nutrition type legislation in that bill. It just interests more people, right? And so that needs to stay in there. But one of the things that can impact what a farm bill looks like is what's going on in the country in agriculture when you're talking about writing that farm bill. So obviously you mentioned it, Jesse, you mentioned energy costs. Energy costs are driving everything, whether that's the fuel we're putting in our tractors, to the tires we're putting on our trucks, to delivering whatever we're using, to fertilizer manufacturing and other input manufacturing. Energy drives everything. And so we've got to see, in my mind, now how that works. Obviously, we have an administration that want to start looking at alternative energy sources. That's going to be a priority for them. How do we lower this energy component, which again plays into so many different parts of agriculture. I don't know if that would be something that potentially could be addressed in a farm bill scenario, or if that's going to be something that would be more from an ad hoc approach. Again, I think given this administration's priorities, certainly they've talked about them a lot. They say that their priorities about climate smart agriculture, and we've said for a long time, Jesse, agriculture can be the white hatted fella or lady on the white horse coming in to fix a lot of problems, through sequestering carbon, reducing our carbon footprint by just adopting technologies that have been just so that innovation has been so amazing. So I look for there to be probably there will be a number of things within maybe the conservation title in the farm bill around climate smart agriculture, and what does that look like, right? We know that a lot of agriculture are practicing climate smart practices. I really did want to applaud USDA for the grant opportunity that they just announced a few months ago, and the Partnership for Climate Smart Agriculture, and how for folks outside of the government to be doing some demonstration projects. Let's see what works, and then maybe there'll be something in there that USDA can adopt. So I think a lot of things, and I think what makes it interesting from a policy standpoint is the fact that we need to get a farm bill written, and at the same time we have some priorities from the administration, and we have situations going on, energy, inflation, and so on. So, I don't know. Farm bill also has a credit title, right? You just mentioned, the Fed raised rates 3/4 of a point. Does that make USDA credit more? Is that going to be utilized at a higher level, at a higher rate, if we start to see these interest rates creep up? We saw a real climb in the mid to late 80s when we had folks paying 20% interest on operating loans, right? And so does that open up an opportunity if we start to see, some of these interest rates creep up? Do we see more borrowers knocking on the door at FSA to get operating money? Some of those are just unknowns at this point.
I would agree with that very much so. Richard, before we run out of time here, real quick, just thinking about all the issues out there facing rural America, in your opinion, if I'm a farmer, a rancher, sitting in rural America and have concerns, I mean, what's going to be the best way to get my voice heard? Is it going to be reaching out to your senators and congressmen and women? How's this going to work? Is it reaching out to your commodity organizations? What is your opinion on that, real quick?
Yeah, I think certainly both avenues are effective, Jesse. And I've been a member of commodity groups and farm organizations all my adult life, and I do believe they play a critical role. When I'm trying to plant corn or plant soybeans, and talking to somebody in Washington is literally the last thing on my mind that day. There are people that are doing that on your behalf every day. things slow down a little bit, you have a relationship, or maybe even if you don't have a relationship with your member of Congress or your member from the U.S. Senate, absolutely reach out. If it's a personal note or a personal contact communication, they value those so much, just to understand what's the constituency thinking. Depending on where you live and depending on who your member of Congress is, they probably already know what you think. But don't take that for granted. Like, yes, definitely reach out and let them know what you're thinking about, the things that are worrying you, the things that are concerning you. Sometimes they can do something about it. Sometimes maybe they can't, but they can't if they don't know about it.
Very, very true. Well, with that, I think we will wrap it up there. And I really enjoyed the discussion here today, Richard, and I appreciate the time. And thank you for joining us. And hopefully, we'll get you back on Market Talk real soon.
Well, that sounds great, Jesse. Always enjoy the conversation and be glad to come back anytime.
And again, that's Richard Fordyce, Business Growth Director with Agriculture for OBP, and we appreciate his time today here on Market Talk. That's going to do it for the show. Find us at markettalkag.com. I'm Jesse Allen. Have a great afternoon.